Boldwood presents Can You Keep a Secret? Written by Joe Lovett and read by Harry Dobby. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. Georgie. Georgie James leaned back in her chair and beamed at her 3 best friends. She bloody loved them. And she loved this pub, with its low beams, squishy leather sofas and roaring log fire, not to mention a room full of regulars, most of whom she'd known her whole life. You didn't get this in a city wine bar. Doing New Year's Eve together again at the Duck and Grapes was amazing. She reached out to place her glass on the table in front of her. Whoops, missed first time. Nope, got it on now. Oops, nope, nearly spilled it. No, it was definitely safely on now. She was a glass-placing genius. And then angled herself back in towards the others. "You're the best friends ever," she told them. "Thank you for being here." "No, thank you for organising us." Beth was shaking her head, her blonde curls bobbing manically around her head. "It wasn't me." Georgie leaned in even further and beckoned so that the others drew closer. Obviously, it was inspired by Poppy being back from Australia, but also it was my hair. "Your hair?" asked Beth, frowning. "Yes," Georgie nodded. "Specifically, a grey hair. It made me feel nostalgic for our youth, so I thought we should do New Year again. I found one the day before my birthday right on the top of my head. Then I looked carefully, and there were loads. Dozens. And obviously I was already feeling old, because 34's only a year away from 35. Next stop 40. Then 50. Poppy's face drooped. "That's right." Ankita did a comedy eye roll. "It's only 16 years from 34 to 50, and then only 20 years until we're 70, so we're totally knocking on the door of old age. Not." She put her arm round Poppy and hugged her. "Honestly, Pops, you're letting the drink get to you." She pointed at Georgie. "And you, Georgie, we are not old. 40's the new 30, and we're nowhere near 40, so we're actually extremely young. We do not need to be melodramatic about our age." Georgie shook her head. "Easy for you to say. There's no way a grey hair would dare to show its face on your head." They all knew that Ankita's beautiful, glossy, sleek, perfect mahogany bobbed hair was tended to fortnightly by a famous central London hairdresser at about 300 quid a throw. Ankita had a very hotshot city job that she said she hated, but did have the advantage of paying her an absolute fortune. Now that, Ankita waved her glass at them, slopping Prosecco over the rim, "is where you're wrong. I've been having my hair dyed since we were 29. Beth's jaw literally dropped. "No, but you said you'd never done anything to your hair. Remember when we went to the spa?" "That was a white lie. There were all those wags listening," said Ankita. "Oh, but I thought we didn't lie to each other." Beth looked like a bewildered 8-year-old. Apparently, almost no adult is capable of holding a 10-minute conversation without lying. Raph, the bartender for the night, was manoeuvring past them, holding 3 packets of smoky bacon and anchovy popcorn, and balancing a tray with 2 pints and a glass of red on the fingers of his other hand. Georgie was impressed. He'd told them earlier he'd never worked in a pub before. "That can't be true." Beth's wide-eyed, bewildered look had morphed into wide-eyed horror. "She's right, it can't be," Ankita agreed. "I mean, I lie, but that's my job for you. Beth probably never does, and Georgie neither, except for chocolate consumption. Same for Poppy. So there you go. It's nonsense." "It's definitely true." Raph was on his way back past. He stopped in front of them and opened one of the bags he was carrying. "Think about it. Think about the last 10 minutes. He held the bag out. "Popcorn?" "It depends what you mean by lying," Georgie mused out loud. thinking of how much possible lying by omission she'd been doing over the past 10 days. Because there are different kinds of lies, aren't there? Like, sometimes people's lies can turn into one big constant lie. Everyone's eyes swiveled to her. Fuck. Why had she said that? Had she lost her mind? What do you mean? Beth cocked her head to one side, her hair only narrowly missing the inside of Poppy's glass as she reached for some popcorn. Georgie took a massive slurp of Prosecco while her mind flipped around desperately, searching for a straw to grasp. Well, like people who always tell white lies. People who automatically compliment everyone they see. Like when someone's wearing a top that doesn't really suit them and you tell them it looks lovely. She smiled, pleased with herself. That was a nice recovery. Do you mean my top? Poppy pulled it down at the hem. I knew I shouldn't have worn it. I'm so fat now. The baby weight's never going to go. I should have bought something new. No, said Georgie, appalled. Really, no, you look lovely, beautiful, stunning. The shape's great for you, and the colour really suits you, genuinely. Not a white lie, the total truth. Being honest, the top would have looked better if it hadn't had baby food on the left shoulder, but no way was Georgie going to mention that right now. And oh, there she went again, lying by omission. That was a tiny lie, though. It really does look good on you, Poppy. Beth nodded furiously, and Ankita chimed in with an, It really does, Pops. Honestly, you look blooming. I shouldn't be blooming. Poppy's face was drooping again. Daniel's 7 months old. Pregnant people should be blooming. Women who gave birth 7 months ago should be back to normal. No, they shouldn't. Georgie did an authoritative headshake. I read somewhere last week that the average British woman doesn't lose all her baby weight until after her baby's 17 months old. I think you look beautiful, Poppy. Raph produced a megawatt smile for her. Poppy's lips immediately turned up at the corners, and her shoulders visibly lifted, which was ridiculous. To be fair, Raph was possibly the most gorgeous man ever to set foot in the whole of Gloucestershire, even including all the celebs who flocked to the Cotswolds in their very unmuddy 4x4s to install solar-powered swimming pools and cinema complexes on their organic farms. His liquid chocolate eyes and slightly lopsided smile could persuade a lot of people to do a lot of things. And so far, he'd seemed like very good company. But he was a stranger, and he had succeeded where all Poppy's actual best friends had failed. And that was just not right. But, Raph continued, pulling a stool up and pointing the open bag of popcorn at Georgie, that weight loss statistic was totally invented, aka a lie. I can see it in your eyes, which totally proves my point. You cannot see it in her eyes, scoffed Ankita. I can, said Raph. I'm a divorce lawyer, and it's my USP. I can always tell when people are lying, which, as I said, they do at least once every 10 minutes. Honestly, he might look like actual sex on legs, but in fact he was a tactless idiot. The mood she was in, Poppy would definitely take that the wrong way. Georgie sneaked a quick look at her. Yep, she looked as though she was on the brink of tears. She was definitely not her usual self. Poppy had always been very positive, very upbeat. It was probably all the post-baby sleep deprivation getting to her. Poppy? She reached for Poppy's hands. I did invest, but the big picture of it is 100% true. Hardly anyone goes back to their pre-pregnancy weight within years of giving birth. Look at me. I'm literally 1.5 stone heavier than I was before I had Max, and I'm obviously not going to lose the weight now because he's 11. And I never manage to do any exercise, and I never get enough sleep, and I really don't mind. I never think about any of it at all. She totally minded. She'd love to get a full 8 hours a night, at least occasionally, but it was difficult getting to bed on time when combining full-time work and single motherhood, and she'd like to lose a bit of weight, if only she had the willpower to do some proper exercise and give up chocolate and cake, and crisps, obviously. Speaking of which, She could murder a packet of salt and vinegar right now. She looked up and caught Raph smirking at her. The look on his face totally implied he thought she was lying. "Seriously," Georgie said, "does anyone like when you do the Mr. Human lie detector thing?" "Lots of people do." He gave her a pantomime wink. Georgie raised her eyes to the ceiling. Ow, that hurt. And the ceiling looked all swirly. It must be because she wasn't used to still being up at 2 a.m. "But, Georgie, it suits you," said Poppy. "You've got the whole Marilyn Monroe amazing hourglass figure and beautiful face thing going on. I haven't. Oh, I've just realised. You think I should buy bigger clothes?" "No, I really, really don't." Georgie put her hand on her forehead. It was still hurting a bit, even now she wasn't looking upwards. "You look great. Honestly, you do." "You really do," Beth and Ankita agreed simultaneously. "You've always looked like you should be a model," said Beth, "and you still do." "An ugly plus-size one," Poppy sniffed, "with falling-out hair and bags under her eyes." "They're all telling the truth." Raph was megawatt smiling again. Not too megawatt, though, just the right amount. "You look fantastic." And again, Poppy produced an actual smile of her own. "So, who's made any New Year's resolutions?" asked Georgie. It was definitely time to change the subject. "I have. Lots." "Me too," said Ankita, "which I don't normally do." "There's no point." Poppy's smile had gone. "I wouldn't keep them. I'm too tired and too bored." "Poppy, darling." Beth put her arms around her, causing some of her hair to dip into the wine in Poppy's glass. "Do you think you'd be happier if you went back to work?" I said I can't desert Daniel." "What about just a day or two a week?" said Georgie. "It wouldn't be deserting him. I started teaching 3 days a week when Max was 6 months old, and he loved nursery. And it was fantastic for me because we still spent the majority of the week together, but I got to have that break from full-time parenting when I was at work. I bet you could find a 1 or 2 day a week locum job, maybe at the village surgery with Declan." Poppy shook her head. "I don't think so." "Why don't you make it your New Year's resolution just to think about it and make a couple of inquiries?" suggested Raph. "You don't have to do it. Just ask." "Maybe I will." Poppy's forehead was wrinkled a bit, like she was actually thinking about it. Seriously, the Raph effect was ridiculous. "Maybe just 1 day a week would be okay for Daniel." "I think it definitely would, and I don't think we should have maybes about our resolutions this year." Georgie reached out for the Prosecco and topped up all their glasses. Wow, they'd finished another bottle. "I think we should definitely do them." She really did want to sort herself out with a healthier lifestyle before she turned 35, which was only just over 10 months away. Oh, I know," she said. "We should make each other do them." "How, though?" Ankita asked. Georgie waved her empty glass at her. "Write them down and make each other stick to them. Simple." Ankita shook her head. "We tried that before. It doesn't work. We need a penalty of some kind. Something that will properly make us." "I've been on my feet for hours. I need a rest." Noah, who was the landlord and Raph's cousin, and who they'd all known forever, put 2 more bottles of Prosecco and 2 of red wine down on the table and squeezed his giant frame into the corner of the 3-seater sofa that Beth and Ankita were sitting on. "What are we talking about?" "Resolutions?" Beth smiled at him. "We all want to make some, and we're trying to work out how to make ourselves keep them." "What are yours?" asked Noah. Beth screwed up her face. "I don't totally want to say." "Beth," said Raph, "are you saying that you have a secret?" "Kind of." "Which is akin to lying by omission?" Raph smirked. "Not always," Georgie said. She knew that because she was fast becoming the queen of actual lying by omission and secrets, and she didn't like it. Raph raised his eyebrows at her, like he could almost tell what she was thinking. Georgie raised her own eyebrows right back at him. He did not know. Okay. Noah finished topping up everyone's glasses. What's the failed resolution penalty going to be? Don't know. Ankita's brow was furrowed in thought. It has to be a proper punishment. Obviously, said Raph. It should be secret-related. Everyone has to divulge their biggest secret if they don't keep their resolutions. That could work. Ankita reached for the red wine. She always liked to mix her drinks because she maintained that it stopped hangovers. It never did. But how will we do that practically? Brainwave, 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 yelled Poppy, looking a lot livelier all of a sudden. We write our secrets down and put them in envelopes and give them to someone else. Yes, yes, yes. Georgie was very impressed. And if we don't keep our resolutions, the secret envelope gets opened and the secret is out. Another brainwave, Poppy screeched. We should all address an envelope to ourselves and then pass the envelope to the left and put our secrets in, seal the envelopes, and then... She paused, and everyone stared at her in anticipation. Post them. Nice, Raph nodded. We get to record the resolutions now, and then prove we kept them, Noah said. Photographic evidence. We can set up a chat and send the photos to it. Poppy was still shouting, very excitably. Clever, Beth nodded. And we reconvene here in exactly 1 year's time to open the envelopes. We need to drink to this, commanded Ankita. Noah filled everyone's glasses again, and then they all went for a down in one, just as Declan, Poppy's husband, pushed open the pub's main door and made his way over to them. Just finished my on-call shift, he said. Amazingly, it took Declan no time at all to understand what they were doing, even though everyone was talking at once. Maybe it was because he was incredibly clever, or maybe it was because he was incredibly sober. Let's get right in. Beth did a little burp. Wait! Ankita held a finger up. They have to be smart. Smart? Repeated Poppy, except it sounded like schmart. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely, dictated Ankita. Georgie nodded. Ow, that hurt her head again. Beth smiled and said, You're very wise, Ankita. Raph grinned at them all. Noah, who'd always been an opening-his-throat expert, had already downed a pint and returned from getting paper, pens, envelopes and stamps, while everyone else was still drinking. The stamps are so we can post them to each other tonight, so we don't renege, handing stationery out to everyone. We have to write our resolutions down too, Ankita instructed. You can seal those all together in a separate envelope. Georgie wrote her address carefully on her envelope. She was pleased that she could focus enough to write, because just now she'd been struggling to see only one of everybody, and the floor had seemed a really long way away. The fire's flames were nice, though. Very flamey, and fiery, and flamey. Nice. Very nice. Right. She needed to think of a secret. Well, she didn't need to think of a secret, because for the past week and a half she'd had the mother of all secrets. It only took about a minute to write it down and seal the envelope. It was easy to write her resolutions, too, because they were the same every year. Lose exactly 1 stone, run a minimum of 2 miles, a minimum of twice a week for an entire year, give up chocolate completely, only eat 2 packets of crisps and 2 slices of cake a week, and only 1 pizza a month. Go to bed by 11, at least 4 nights a week. Plus, stop pulling grey hairs out in case it was true that about 3 million grew in the place of each one. And finally, because Poppy had been looking miserable on each of the 3 times she'd seen her this week, she wrote that she had to cheer her up. By Valentine's Day. 6 weeks seemed like a reasonable length of time to do it in, to make it smart. And then she added an extra final one for good measure. She was going to take up yoga. It needed to be measurable. She was going to go once every 2 weeks. And actually, she wouldn't mind learning Italian. Beth had suggested camping next summer. It would be amazing to camp in Italy and be able to speak Italiano. Or Italiana? Or whatever it was. She'd know what it was soon. Exciting. They could go on a city break to Rome or Florence or Venice too. What would make it measurable and timely? Oh, she could take a GCSE in it before the end of the year. She could totally manage that if she only had one subject to focus on. 16-year-olds often did 8 or more subjects at once. She tapped her head as she was sitting there, pleased with her own clever thinking. And finally, really finally, she wouldn't mind learning to ice skate. It needed to be measurable. Okay. She was going to learn to do a jump on ice before the end of the year. Torval and Dean, here she came. Okay, finished. She sealed her secret in the envelope that Raph, who was sitting on her right, had just handed her, and said, "Done. Who's ready to come to the postbox?" Everyone else except Raph was still writing or thinking. Georgie started laughing. "I'll come with you." Raph stood up. "People have got their thinking faces on," Georgie hiccuped. "They look very, very funny." Raph smiled at her. She thought he did anyway, because neither of the images she could see of him were that clear. "Come on, maybe some fresh air will stop your hiccups." They opened the door and discovered that for once the weather forecast had been right. It had been snowing while they were inside. "It's beautiful." Georgie concentrated hard on walking down the steps. "The snowflakes are very flaky." Oops, it was a lot more slippery than she'd expected, and she was wearing her favourite wedge-heeled ankle boots, which had 0 grip. Raph stood her up straight and held out his arm for her to take. "Thank you, kind sir." He was very tall. "Your arm's very strong," she said, as they walked round the village green to the postbox on the opposite side from the pub. "It's got very nice muscles." She gave them a little squeeze. Raph was laughing. "I'm going to get you a nice pint of water when we get back inside," he said. It was very slippery again next to the postbox. Slide, slide, slide. Georgie was swishing her feet backwards and forwards. Raph caught her just as she started to spin through the air. "You should only have swished 1 foot at a time." "You're very wise." Georgie wagged a finger at him. "I'm going to remember that for next time." She looked up at him. She hadn't kissed anyone since Max's conception, exactly 12 years ago to the night. Raph had very kissable-looking lips. "I like you," she said. "I like you too, and you are very, very drunk, so we're going to have a little walk all the way around the green, and then we're going to get you some water." By the time they got back inside, everyone except Beth had finished. "She's writing a bloody essay." Ankita was tapping the table a little impatiently with her pen. She's on her 3rd side of A4. "It's important to explain things fully," said Beth, "and I've almost finished now." "Here you go." Raph placed 2 pint glasses of water down in front of Georgie. "I think you might feel better in the morning if you drink this now." "Thank you," said Georgie happily. "You're very nice." She downed the first one. "That was quite watery," she said. "That's water for you," said Raph, grinning. "Have the other one." "Okay." Georgie downed that one too, a bit more slowly. Then she slid down onto the sofa next to the fire and closed her eyes. "Georgie, wake up," she heard Ankita say sometime later. Georgie dragged her eyes open. "Ow, my head hurts." "Mine too." Ankita pulled her arm. "Beth's finished. Time to go home." "Okay." Wow. When they got outside, the air was so cold it was like it was biting into your forehead. Georgie took a couple of steps along the icy path, and then suddenly remembered. She stopped still, and Beth bumped into her from behind. "Oh, fuck. Fuck, fuck, fuck." "Are you okay?" Beth asked. "No," She really was not. She'd made a monumental mistake. Fuck. Fine, she said in a strangled voice. Night. And she dashed off across the village green to her mum's house as fast as she could, nearly breaking her ankle on the ice about 5 times on the way. New Year's Day was not going to be happy. Chapter 2. Georgie. 7 hours later, Georgie typed "and" into a note on her phone and then paused with her finger in the air. And what? She was sure there was one more resolution she was missing. She'd obviously put her usual ones down, but then she'd put some more down. She remembered thinking that she was very cunning, and that if someone was going to make her stick to her resolutions this year, she might as well take full advantage. She'd definitely written yoga down. And learning a language, she was pretty sure. She'd thought about holidays. She and Beth had been talking earlier in the evening about camping together in the summer holidays in France, Spain, or Italy, and she was sure she'd written down French, Spanish, or Italian. Which one, though? And then there was something else. She had a feeling it had been something to do with her surroundings. What, though? Something related to the pub? The date? What they'd been drinking? The decor? Who knew? She shook her head in frustration and winced as an invisible clamp seemed to settle around her forehead. What was she going to do? It would be a disaster if she couldn't remember all the resolutions. There was no way Ankita would let any of them get away with this. There was no question that they'd all be sitting in the pub next 31st of December reading out their lists, which could be a very bad thing. Even worse, what if someone somehow opened the envelope now? Her mind was whirling from the many possible ramifications, all bad. She needed so much to work out when, and as soon as possible. How, though? She typed language and surroundings into her phone, and then lay back and stared at the ceiling above the bed. Okay, she needed to clear her head so she could think. She needed to get hold of the resolutions envelope and check what she'd written. Or she needed to get the secret envelope back somehow. Because whether or not it was right, it wasn't a good thing to have written it down and put it out there. What if Raph opened it out of curiosity? He was Noah's cousin, and she'd known Noah forever, and he seemed nice and trustworthy. But what if he wasn't? Or what if, somehow, someone else opened it? Ugh, she'd vomited bile into her mouth at that thought. Right, she needed to do something. Going for a run would be the best way to clear her head, and it would tick one thing off the resolutions list. At the very least, she had to make sure she wouldn't have to read this secret out next New Year's Eve. So, she needed to ignore her throbbing head and churning stomach and get herself into her lycra and go and get some of those endorphins that fit people raved about, and then make a plan. She opened her barely used running app, mapped out an exactly 2-mile-long circular route starting from the front door, pushed her duvet down and swung her legs round and off the bed, and nearly threw up. Yep, realistically, no amount of endorphins would be enough of a miracle drug to make her feel good today. It was lucky she'd packed her as-new lycra for the weekend. She always took it if she and Max went away for New Year's, just in case. Obviously, in normal years, she never put it on in the end, because you never felt up to a run on New Year's Day, or the next day, and so on, until before you knew it, another year of no running had gone by. But this was not a normal year. Actually getting her running tights on turned out to be a challenge in itself. Sitting on the edge of her bed, with the tights dragged up just above her knees, she pulled the waistband as far round towards the front as she could and squinted at the label. Yep, there were a good 2 sizes too small. Maybe, with all the resolution she was about to keep, they'd actually fit her soon. Her Met Office app told her that it was 2 degrees outside, so she could wear her puffer jacket to hide her unappealingly squished thighs and only halfway up her bottom leggings. Ideal. Once she'd manhandled herself into her sports bra and poured herself into her running top, her childhood full-length wall mirror confirmed that head-to-toe too small lycra was indeed not her best look. It made her dimply. She stepped closer to the mirror and peered at her head. Yep, she had a couple more grey hairs. She reached up and did not pull them out. Instead, she angled her phone camera and took a photo of them and her empty hand for the resolution record, then posted it to the resolutions chat they'd set up last night, noting smugly that she was the first person to post anything on there. Nice. And wow, she was pretty sure that she had a tiny rush of endorphins from the smugness. Okay, time to go. She'd better act normal and say morning to everyone, even though there was a hideous possible sword of Damocles poised above her aching head. Max, her mother and stepfather were all eating a fry-up in the kitchen. "Happy New Year," she said, trying not to gag at the smell of oil. "Bacon and eggs?" asked her stepfather. Actually, I wouldn't mind a bacon sandwich. She never mentioned bacon in her resolutions, so she was totally fine to have it, and there was no hangover that a bacon sarnie couldn't help. In about 15 minutes, if that's okay? 15 minutes, 2 miles. Nope, not a hope in hell. Actually, probably in about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. I'm just popping out first. "Mum, are you wearing running kit?" Max was staring at her. "Yep." Georgie gave what was hopefully a nonchalant-looking shrug. "Sick," said Max. Sick was about right. Georgie hadn't felt this nauseous since she was pregnant. "Happy New Year." Her mother looked up from her magazine. "Enjoy your... what? Where are you going now?" Georgie winced. Her family's voices were really hurting her head. "Just a run," she said. Max and her stepfather were both staring at her. Fair enough, neither of them had ever witnessed her go for a run before. "Oh," her mother frowned. "You'll be back to look after Max, though, won't you? We're having a family New Year's lunch." "Yes, I will." Georgie spoke loudly to try to divert Max's attention, but it didn't work. "Do you mean you're having a family lunch without us?" he asked. "Yes, an all-day thing, actually. Evening, too." Her mother wasn't even looking at him, her grandson, as she spoke. She was concentrating on her magazine again. "Us and the girls and Alfie." The girls were her other 2 daughters, Georgie's half-sisters, Lauren and Lottie, and Alfie was Lauren's baby. "But we're in your family," Max persisted. "Not..." Georgie's mum turned a page. "I mean, just our little nuclear family." "You can come if you like," Georgie's stepfather said after a pause, during which Georgie's mother had continued to read her magazine. Georgie battled with herself not to say, "How dare you treat my son like that?" and just about won. That's a really lovely invitation. She knew her voice was laced with anger, and she didn't care. "But we're meeting our friends in the pub, my best friends, a different kind of family." She looked at Max. She really didn't want to leave him now, but for his sake as much as anyone's, she had to attempt to stick to her resolutions. "I'll be back soon," she told him. "You can play FIFA while I'm out if you like. I love you." She had to try very hard not to slam the kitchen door shut behind her. If there was one thing she hated even more than being second best to both her parents' new families, it was them making Max feel second best. How could they? Thank goodness for her friends, who were more like family than her actual family had ever been. And because she loved her friends, she was going to get out there now and run her 2 miles and then make a plan. After a bit more severe pain, while she bent down to do up the laces of her pristine, never-before-used, at least 5-year-old running shoes, her waistband digging into her bladder area, and her head feeling as though it was going to explode, she let herself out of the house. As she went, she took a quick selfie and posted it to the chat, feeling smug all over again when she saw that still no one else had posted anything in there. If you had to go running, it was a beautiful day for it. Frosty, with light, powdery snow falling, but with a blue sky and the sun peeping through from behind pale grey cotton wool clouds. The setting was amazing too. Georgie hadn't really appreciated it when she was growing up, but as an adult she recognised every time she visited how chocolate box perfect melting Bishop was. All the houses were 18th and 19th century honey-coloured Cotswold stone, set either round the village green or in windy little roads off the green. Her mother and stepfather's house, where she and Max were staying for the weekend, was wide, low and double-fronted, with views across the green from the front and over their garden and open fields from the back windows. Her eyes lit on the post box on the edge of the green. She should Google whether it was legal for posties to give letters back to you if you lay in wait for them when they came to collect mail. Although she'd need to think about that because, since the address on the envelope was in Raph's handwriting, it would be tricky to prove that she'd written it without showing the letter itself, which she obviously wasn't going to do. He'd been the village postman as long as she could remember and knew everyone. Maybe it would be safer to convince Raph to give the letter back to her unopened after it was delivered. How, though? He lived in New York. She heard herself moan out loud. It was all so complicated. She jogged across the green and around the pond in its centre, enjoying her trained feet crunching the lovely, untouched, crisp snow, and really not enjoying the way that every step caused her head to pound. By the time she got to the pub opposite, her heart was pounding too. She was boiling, and every step felt like an effort. She ran round the corner of the pub and straight into a much larger person. Her feet lost their grip, and she started to fall, until strong arms caught her and stood her upright. Raph's voice, sounding a little sniggery, said, "Morning. Would running be one of your resolutions?" Georgie had a flashback to last night, and the same strong arms stopping her from falling over next to the postbox, and, oh no, 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 she'd commented on his arms and his muscles. In fact, she'd practically sexually harassed him. He was a lawyer, and therefore probably litigious. She could see the headlines in the Bristol Telegraph now. School deputy head loses job after drunkenly sexually harassing New York lawyer. If she'd had any breath left for it, she'd have groaned. She should say something, apologise maybe, but she really couldn't talk. She also needed to keep running, or she'd never get going again. "Resolution," she managed to say. "Got to go." "I'm out for a run too. Want to run together?" She so didn't. "Too slow for you?" "Not at all. It'd be nice to have the company." "Great." Georgie tried to smile. They jogged together down the lane, with Raph not sounding in any way as if he was making any physical effort or as if he was hungover, chatting about the snow and the village, and Georgie grunting on her side of the conversation. The lane was long, really, really long. Georgie's chest was so hot. It was like it had a clamp round it. She was sure she was going to vomit. This was what marathon runners must feel like 26 miles in. At the end of the lane was a stile, and on the other side of the stile was a hill, and Raph was still next to her. He climbed over it, giving her an excellent view of his toned legs, which, despite all the thoughts whirring in her head. "Want a hand?" He turned round and held an arm out towards her. "I'm fine, thanks," she panted. "You sure? I'm very strong." He was outright laughing now. "Muscly." She should just be grateful that he probably wasn't going to sue her. She gave what she hoped was a dignified smile. "Honestly, I really am. Thanks. You go. She waved vaguely at the hill. No, this is nice. He was still laughing. Companionable. Georgie didn't have the energy to care now. She was too busy putting one foot in front of the other and not throwing up. The hill was really, really steep. Her thighs were already aching and, weirdly, and not pleasantly, so were her bum cheeks. Raph seemed absolutely fine. The one good thing about his presence was that it meant that Georgie had to keep on running. Eventually they arrived at the top of the hill and started going down the other side. That was a lot better, until Georgie's stitch set in. You okay? Asked Raph. Stitch. You need to keep on running through it. Georgie didn't answer. She couldn't speak. Eventually, they arrived back at the pub. Georgie stopped and nearly fell over, her legs now turned to jelly. She was unbelievably hot, but she absolutely couldn't take her coat off in front of Raph. Her head was miraculously better, so maybe some of those endorphins had indeed kicked in, or maybe it was only better relative to the rest of her. Well done, Raph said. Georgie couldn't reply. She was so hot now that any minute she was going to have to give in and take her jacket off. Everything was swimming in front of her eyes. Her stomach was going like a washing machine on top spin cycle and... No. She put her hands to her mouth, but nothing could have made a difference at that point. Her stomach gave a huge heave. She and Raph both stood staring for a while at the lumpy vomit, covering his legs and previously blue and green trainers. She should definitely chew her food more, especially sweet corn. Better out than in, said Raph, eventually. Obviously, the first person Georgie saw when she walked into the pub 3 hours later was Raph. How's your head? He asked, with a definite smirk. He also had a twinkle in his eye, which was good, because there was a strong chance she was going to need him on side, and after the vomit this morning, he'd scarpered quite quickly, and she'd wondered if he might avoid. Surprisingly, totally fine. The run and vomit plus some carbs worked wonders. I feel completely normal, and I haven't even had to take any paracetamol. How are your trainers? They're totally fine. They couldn't be, even if they were washable. She was definitely going to have to buy him some new ones. She hoped they weren't super expensive ones, but had a suspicion they might be. Raph just looked expensive. When did you vomit? Max asked from behind her. Hello, I'm Raph. Raph put out his hand. In 2 seconds flat, Max seemed to grow about 3 inches in height, a couple of inches across the shoulders, and 4 years in age. He put his own hand out and shook Raph's. I'm Max. And he deepened his voice, too. Max is my son. Georgie did not want to discuss the vomit with either of them. Max, why don't you go and find the others? So, Mum vomited? Georgie looked at Raph. Raph looked back at her and raised an eyebrow. Georgie sighed and waited to see what he'd say. Only a little bit, said Raph, and it was understandable. Why? I got the impression it was your mum's first run for a while. It's always hard work the first time. Next time, she goes, it'll be a lot easier. Georgie mouthed, thank you, and sighed at the thought of next time she went running. She really needed to chat more to Raph, to try to gauge whether or not she could maybe just ask for her envelope, but not in front of anyone else. How long are you over here for? She asked instead. Another few days. Why? Do you fancy going running together again? He chuckled at his own weak joke, and Georgie rolled her eyes at him. Really not. Just wondered, you need to tell me your shoe size so I can get you new trainers. You are not buying me new trainers. Obviously, I am going to buy you new trainers, so you might as well tell me which ones you want so I don't buy ones that you don't want, because that would be a total waste of money and you'd feel really bad about being ungrateful and wasteful if you didn't wear them.
No, I just think you were silly to have bought them when I told you it was completely unnecessary.
She'd have to ask Noah to sneak a look at Raf's shoes and tell her his size, although that would mean admitting she'd vomited on the trainers. It would have been an appropriate level of secret to have written down, had it already happened before last night. I once vomited on someone's trainers. A small, non-earth-shattering kind of secret. There were so many things she could happily have put. Eating chocolate spread straight out of the jar with a spoon every evening, lying about stealing her mother's lipstick when she was 9, lusting after Simon Cowell. Why had she been so stupid?
"Why do you want to buy new trainers for Raf?" asked Max. "And why did you ask if they go in the washing machine? Mum, did you vomit on Raf's trainers?"
"Did you?" Ankita, who'd just appeared from behind Max, sounded very gleeful. "Did she what?" Poppy, Declan and Daniel were behind Ankita. "Vomit on Raf's trainers." Ankita could be very annoying at times.
"Unfortunate."
Raf shook his head sorrowfully.
"You shouldn't have persisted about buying new ones."
"Yes, I vomited on Raf. Why don't we go and find our table?" Georgie started to edge towards the dining part of the pub to try to stop all the hilarious vomit-related chat.
"Can I bring drinks to your table?" asked Raf. "Hair of the dog, Georgie?"
"I'm drinking water." She could still hear Raf laughing, even when she'd walked away and sat down with her back to him. "So, did anyone else go for a run this morning?" she asked. "Why haven't any of you added any photos to the chat yet?" Ankita and Declan had both been running, but that was no surprise because they were both regular exercisers. Ankita hadn't even bothered with any fitness-related resolutions. "So, neither one of you had running as one of your resolutions?" she asked Poppy and Beth. "I thought you had an exercise resolution every year. I've spent my entire adult life wanting to be about 1 billion times fitter than I actually am, so it's always on my list." "Me too, normally." Poppy was looking no less gloomy than she had last night. "But next year, I hope. I'm still breastfeeding for the next few months, and I feel so unfit that I don't think I could even work my way up to a jog at the moment. And obviously I wouldn't fit into any of my running kit. No, honestly, if I can go for a run, so can you. I mean, I actually vomited at the end. That's how unfit I am. And my running kit's way, way too small. I know that I'm going to sound like a slap-me-now instant fitness evangelist, but we could go together when we've both bought some new kit. You honestly cannot be more unfit than I am." "I don't think so. I'm unbelievably unfit." "So am I. I vomited. And it wasn't because I was hungover. It was because of the run and because I was too hot." Georgie looked round, but there was no sign of Raf. She was fairly sure that if he told Poppy she could run, she'd be in her jogging kit within the hour.
"I'm sure you could go running, sweetheart."
Declan was smiling at his wife. The most surprising people can work their way up to run from a low starting point. "Thank you." Poppy did not return his smile. "A very low starting point. The most surprising people. Thank you." Georgie stared at her, alarmed. Poppy never sounded bitter like this. "No." Declan shook his head, looking as alarmed as Georgie felt. "I didn't mean it in a bad way. Just that you've just had a baby, so you haven't had the opportunity to do any running recently." Poppy didn't smile at all. What had happened? Declan was still shaking his head, looking a bit swivel-eyed, worried. "What about you, Beth?" Georgie asked, panicked. Running was clearly too contentious a topic. "I decided to do swimming and yoga instead, and I don't have any other resolutions other than one big one, which is also my secret, so I can't tell you about it." Beth was not good with secrets. She'd tell them all by the end of the month, if not the week. Georgie was sure. "Is Dominic joining us?" asked Ankita. Dominic was Beth's fiancé. He wasn't the kindest person, and Ankita had been quite vocal about how she didn't think he was right for Beth. No. Beth's face clouded over for a moment. He changed his mind. I think he wants to catch up on some work. Ankita raised one eyebrow and pursed her lips, clearly not impressed. Speaking of which, I just came for 5 minutes to say hi. Declan stood up. I need to go in and get on with some admin. The amount of paperwork GPs have to complete seems to increase exponentially year on year. Georgie snuck a look at Poppy. She was in her turn, taking a sideways look at Declan. She was slightly frowning, with her eyes narrowed, like she was kind of sizing him up. Really odd. Georgie wasn't exactly a relationship expert, never having actually had a long-term one herself. But in her experience, couples did not usually look at each other like that. Although, equally, all couples did argue at times, everyone knew that. And having a baby was a prime time for arguing, with all the pressure of lack of sleep and childcare. That was probably what it was. Okay, she said, to take Poppy's mind off whatever was going on between her and Declan. I'm going to talk you all through my vomiting incident in detail now. And it worked. Everyone laughed, and everything was fine, all the way through their roasts. And then Ankita said, "Who's got space for pudding?" "Definitely me." Georgie reached for the menu. "I earned it with that run." "I can't," Poppy said. "Resolution."